The night was heavy, as if the sky itself carried the weight of secrets too painful to speak. She sat in the shadows, knees pulled to her chest, her arms wrapped tightly around herself like frail armor. Dirt streaked her cheeks, but the stains that tormented her most were the invisible ones, scars carved not into her skin, but into her soul. She whispered to herself that she was unworthy, tainted, ruined beyond repair. For years she had hidden behind walls of silence, convinced that no one could touch her without being dirtied too. Every kindness felt suspicious. Every smile felt like pity. So when he came into her life, quiet, steady, unshaken by her brokenness, she didn't know how to breathe. He was nothing like the others she had known. Where the world had judged, mocked, or taken advantage, he only looked at her with something unfamiliar: respect. At first, she avoided him. She couldn't bear the possibility that his gaze might hold the same cruelty she had seen before. She stayed distant, speaking little, lowering her eyes whenever he was near. But he never forced words from her lips, never demanded her trust. He simply stayed, like the soft presence of fire in the cold, close enough to warm, but never burning. That night, when she was too tired to hide her tears, he approached her. She stiffened immediately, the old fear rushing back like a tide. Her breath trembled as he drew near, and her voice broke before she could stop it. "Please, don't touch me," she whispered, her tone sharp with panic, but hollow with despair. "I'm dirty." The words stabbed the air like broken glass. She waited for him to step back, to look at her with disgust, to confirm the truth she had always believed about herself. Instead, there was silence. Not the silence of rejection, but the silence of reverence. Slowly, he knelt before her, lowering himself until his eyes were level with hers. She tried to turn away, but his gaze was gentle, steady, refusing to let her hide. Then, without hurry, without force, he raised his hand and touched her face. His fingers were warm against her cheek, soft where life had only been cruel. The touch was not greedy, not demanding, not pitying. It was reverent, as though he were touching something sacred, something untouchable by shame. Her chest tightened. Her tears fell harder, because this simple act undid her defenses more than cruelty ever could. She had prepared herself for hatred, for rejection, for indifference. But she had not prepared for tenderness. She had not prepared for someone to look at her as if she was more than the ashes of her past. Her lips trembled as she tried to speak, to push him away again. But no words came. For the first time in years, she felt truly seen, not as dirty, not as ruined, but as human. He didn't speak either. His silence was its own language, telling her she didn't need to explain, didn't need to justify her existence. His touch said everything his voice did not. You are not what they did to you. You are not what you fear. You are still worthy. In that moment, something fragile shifted inside her. She wasn't healed. Not yet. But a seed was planted, one that whispered of the possibility of healing, of trust, of love. And as he drew his hand away, leaving the ghost of warmth on her skin, she realized that maybe, just maybe, her story wasn't over. The night after his touch, she couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt the warmth of his hand still lingering on her cheek. It unsettled her, not because it was unwanted, but because it was too gentle, too sacred. She had lived so long believing she was nothing more than filth that she didn't know what to do with kindness. It was easier to accept cruelty. It matched what she thought of herself. But tenderness, that was dangerous. Tenderness could break down the walls she had built so carefully. In the days that followed, she avoided him. Whenever he drew near, she found reasons to leave, fetching water, tending to chores, pretending to be busy. Yet even in her avoidance, she noticed him. He never pressed, never questioned. His presence was steady, like the earth itself, and though she told herself she wanted distance, part of her felt safer knowing he was nearby. One afternoon, as she carried a small bucket from the stream, her foot slipped on the muddy bank. The water splashed out, soaking her dress as she stumbled and fell. Her first instinct was panic, not from the fall, but from the shame of appearing weak. She scrambled to her feet quickly, wiping her hands against the dirty cloth of her dress, muttering, "Clumsy, stupid." Before she could retreat, he appeared. He had been watching from a short distance, and now he stepped closer, his brows drawn in quiet concern. "Are you hurt?" he asked simply. She shook her head, too embarrassed to meet his eyes. "I'm fine." Her voice was sharp, defensive, as if daring him to press further. But he didn't. Instead, he bent down, lifted the bucket, and refilled it from the stream. When he handed it back, his fingers brushed hers, not deliberately, but enough to send a shiver through her. He said nothing more, only nodded and stepped aside so she could pass. That small act gnawed at her for the rest of the evening. He hadn't mocked her, hadn't scolded her, hadn't even offered pity. He had simply helped and moved on, as though her dignity still mattered. That night, by the fire, she finally broke the silence. Her voice was quiet, uncertain, but it carried the weight of years. "Why do you treat me like this?" she asked, not looking at him. He glanced at her, his expression unreadable in the flicker of firelight. "Like what?" "Like I'm not ruined." Her words were jagged, raw, pulled from the depths of her pain. He was silent for a long moment, then spoke with steady calm. "Because you're not." Her throat tightened, and she wanted to argue, to throw his words back at him. But the way he said it, not as if he were trying to convince her, but as if it were a simple truth, left her without a reply. For the first time, she allowed herself to sit beside him without flinching. They didn't speak much more, but the silence was different this time. It was not heavy with fear or shame, but soft, like a fragile bridge being built between them. Over the next days, their bond grew quietly. He showed her small kindnesses, a blanket when the nights grew, cold, food shared without expectation, patience when she had none for herself. Each gesture unsettled her but also softened her. She began to realize that trust wasn't demanded. It was earned, one moment at a time. And though the shadows of her past still clung to her, she started to wonder if maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward. For a while, the days passed in a fragile rhythm, like walking across a rope bridge that swayed with every step, but somehow held. She still carried her scars like armor, but around him, she no longer felt the constant need to hide. His silence was her safety, his patience, her shield. But peace is always tested. It began on a dusky evening when they were gathering wood. The air was still, but her nerves weren't. She had strayed a little from him, distracted by her thoughts, when voices cut through the quiet. Men's voices, rough, careless, mocking, her breath caught in her throat. The sound alone was enough to pull her back into memories she had fought so hard to bury. She froze, her body trembling as three figures emerged from the trees. "Well, look what we found," one of them sneered, his eyes crawling over her like a predator sizing its prey. She staggered back, clutching her arms around herself, as though she could disappear inside them. Panic surged. She couldn't breathe. She wanted to scream, but no sound came out. Then, before they could step closer, he appeared, silent as shadow, steady as stone. His presence alone was enough to shift the air. "Go," he said firmly, his voice low but unyielding. The men laughed. "And who are you to tell us what to do?" One spat, stepping forward. But the laughter faded when he didn't flinch, didn't move. There was something in his eyes, the kind of steadiness that warned of storms not worth provoking. After a tense silence, the men muttered curses and slipped back into the trees, their bravado scattering like dust. When they were gone, she collapsed to her knees, shaking violently. Her chest heaved, her breath shallow and uneven. She couldn't tell if it was relief or terror that made her heart race. He knelt beside her but didn't touch her this time. Instead, he waited, his presence close, but not pressing. "You're safe," he said quietly. Her hands clawed at her dress, her voice cracking as she whispered, I can't do this. I'll only bring trouble. He shook his head, cutting her words short with calm certainty. "You don't bring trouble. Trouble comes on its own. But you—" His voice softened. "You're worth protecting." The words broke something inside her. Hot tears blurred her vision as she shook her head violently. "No, I'm not, don't you see? Her voice dropped to a whisper, raw and trembling. "I'm dirty. I'll never be anything else." He leaned closer then, his eyes holding hers with steady strength. "That's not how I see you." And before she could argue, his hand lifted, slow, careful, deliberate, and brushed away her tears. His thumb lingered against her cheek, gentle as before, but now there was something else in it too. Defiance. As if he was refusing to let her past dictate her worth. Her whole body trembled. She wanted to push him away, to scream at him for lying, but her heart betrayed her. In the quiet of his touch, she felt something she hadn't known in years. Safety. She broke then, not with anger but with sobs that shook her to the core. He didn't hush her, didn't tell her to stop. He simply stayed, letting her grief pour out until her tears finally slowed. When she lifted her head again, exhausted but lighter somehow, he spoke softly. "You are not dirty. You are not ruined. You are here. And that's enough." His words, planted deeper than any seed had before. And though fear still lingered, she realized something terrifying and hopeful. She was starting to believe him. The days after the encounter with the men felt strangely different. Something in her had cracked open the night she wept against his hand, and though the wound still bled, there was also light seeping in. She noticed things she hadn't before. The way his eyes softened when they met hers, the way he carried silence not as a weapon, but as a gift, the way his presence steadied the air around her. But with every new spark of warmth came a colder shadow. Fear. She had lived too long believing she was unworthy. If she let herself hope, if she let herself trust, what would happen when it all shattered? What if his gentleness faded? What if one day he looked at her and saw the filth she saw in herself? That fear gnawed at her constantly. One evening, as the sun bled gold across the horizon, she sat apart from him, staring at the fire. Her hands trembled in her lap as she thought of the way he had touched her face, not once, but twice, each time breaking through walls she swore were impenetrable. It made her want something she had sworn never to want again. Closeness. But closeness meant risk. He approached quietly, setting down a bowl of food beside her. She muttered thanks without looking up. He didn't press her to eat, didn't ask her to speak. He simply sat down, close enough for her to feel his warmth, far enough not to intrude. The silence stretched until she couldn't bear it anymore. "Why do you stay?" Her voice cracked, raw and uncertain. He glanced at her but didn't seem surprised by the question. "Because I want to." Her throat tightened. "You shouldn't. I'm broken." The word felt like ash on her tongue. He shook his head slowly. "No, you've been hurt. That's not the same thing." She swallowed hard, anger rising not at him, but at herself. "You don't understand. If you knew what I've been through, what I've done, you wouldn't look at me like that." His voice was steady, calm as a river. "Then tell me, The words struck her like lightning. She stiffened, heart pounding. Tell him? Let him see the filth, the shame, the stains she had hidden? Her body trembled at the thought. She wanted to confess, to purge it all, but terror silenced her. Instead, she shook her head violently. No, I can't. You'll hate me. He didn't move, didn't argue. His gaze was gentle but unyielding. Nothing you say will make me see you as less than I do now. Her chest ached at his certainty. Tears welled in her eyes, but she turned, away, hiding them. She couldn't believe him. Not yet. But his words planted themselves inside her, stubborn seeds refusing to be ignored. That night, she lay awake under the stars, torn between fear and longing. Her body curled tight, as if to protect the fragile hope blooming inside her. She whispered to herself in the dark, "Don't be foolish. Don't want what you can't have." But when she remembered the way he touched her face, as though she were sacred, her heart betrayed her. For the first time in years, she didn't just want survival. She wanted more. She wanted love, and that was the most terrifying thing of all. For a brief while, she lived in the fragile peace he created around her. The days were gentle, gathering food, tending to the fire, walking in quiet companionship. She began to breathe without fear of every shadow. She even caught herself, smiling once, though she quickly hid it, afraid he might see. But peace never lasts when the past is still chasing. It came without warning. They were returning from the stream one afternoon, buckets of water balanced carefully, when she heard it. Laughter. Not his calm, quiet kind, but sharp, mocking laughter that clawed at her chest. Her hands froze around the bucket's handle, her body stiffening like prey cornered by hunters. Then the voices grew clearer, men, again. Not strangers this time. She recognized them. Her blood turned to ice. They stepped into view from the trees, 3 of them, their grins curling into something cruel. "Well, if it isn't our little stray," one jeered, his eyes sliding over her like poison. "Thought you could run forever?" The bucket slipped from her hands, crashing into the dirt as water spilled at her feet. Her breath came in shallow gasps. She wanted to disappear, to vanish into the earth, but her legs refused to move. Beside her, he stepped forward, silent but unyielding. His body shifted subtly in front of hers, a shield of flesh and will. His eyes locked onto the men with a warning, as sharp as steel. But they only laughed. "You think she's worth protecting?" Another sneered. "She's nothing but used up dirt. Everyone knows it." The words cut her deeper than any blade. Her knees weakened, and shame washed over her, like a tidal wave. She wanted to scream at him to leave her, to let them take her if it meant saving himself from her ruin. Instead, her voice broke into a whisper only he could hear. "They're right. I am dirty. Don't fight for me." He turned slightly, just enough for his eyes to catch hers. And in them, she saw fire. "No," he said firmly. "They're wrong, and I will fight." Before she could protest, the men lunged. The clash was sudden, brutal. He moved with precision, every strike deliberate, every step meant to keep them away from her. She watched in horror, torn between terror and awe, as he fought not for pride, not for glory, but for her. The battle seemed endless, but eventually the men stumbled back, bruised and beaten, muttering curses as they retreated into the trees. Silence followed, broken only by her ragged breathing. He stood, chest rising and falling with controlled breath, then turned to her. She shook her head wildly, tears streaming down her face. "Why did you do that? Why would you fight for me? Don't." "You see, they're right. I'm ruined. I'm not worth—" Before she could finish, he stepped close, gripping her shoulders firmly but gently, forcing her eyes to meet his. His voice was steady, fierce with conviction. Listen to me. You are not what they say. You are not what they did to you. You are more than the dirt they tried to bury you in. Her lips trembled, the words tangled in her throat. But what if I can't believe that? His hand lifted once more, brushing the tears from her cheek, the same way he had done before. Then I'll believe it for you, he whispered, until you can. Her chest heaved, her heart breaking open under the weight of his words. For the first time, she didn't shrink from his touch. She let it linger, let the warmth seep into her, even as fear whispered in the back of her mind. The past had returned, to haunt her. But in his eyes, she glimpsed something stronger than fear. The possibility of a future where she was not dirty, not ruined, but whole. The fight with the men left echoes in her mind for days. Their cruel words still circled like vultures, dirty, ruined, worthless. Yet something else lingered too. The way he had stood between her and danger, unshaken, unashamed. He hadn't flinched at their insults, hadn't looked at her with pity afterward. Instead, he had touched her face as though those words meant nothing. And for the first time, she wondered if maybe they did mean nothing. It was a terrifying thought. She had worn shame like a second skin for so long that letting it peel away felt almost unbearable. But slowly, with him at her side, she began to try. One morning, she surprised herself. She rose earlier than usual, slipping outside before he could wake. The air was cool, the grass still wet with dew. She carried the empty water bucket down to the stream alone. Her heart pounded the whole way, memories of danger whispering in her ear, but she forced her steps forward. At the water's edge, she knelt and let the stream run over her hands. The rippling surface reflected her face back at her, pale and tired but alive. For years, she had avoided her reflection, afraid of what she would see. Now, she forced herself to look, not ruined, not dirty, just me. Her throat tightened, tears pricking her eyes, but she didn't turn away this time. She filled the bucket and carried it back, her arms straining, but her steps steady. When she reached the fire, he was awake, waiting. His gaze softened as he saw her approach. "You went alone," he said quietly. She nodded, setting the bucket down. "I had to try." Something unspoken passed between them, his pride, her fragile courage. And for the first time, she felt a flicker of strength inside her that was her own. Over the next days, she began to do more. Small things, but things she had once avoided. She tended to the fire, gathered wood without waiting for him, even tried to laugh at a story he told one night. The sound startled her, brittle at first, like glass cracking, but then warmer, fuller. His answering smile made her heart ache in a way that felt almost good. Yet with every step forward came the shadow of fear. She often pulled back when she felt too close to him, retreating into silence or retreating physically. He never pushed, never demanded, but she saw the flicker of hurt in his eyes sometimes, and it cut her deeply. One evening, as the sun set, behind the trees, she sat by the fire, wrestling with her thoughts. At last she spoke. "I don't know how to be loved," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I don't know if I can." He looked at her for a long time before answering. "You don't have to know," he said softly. "Love doesn't ask for lessons. It only asks for trust." The words sank deep into her, stirring something fragile but real. She still feared the risk, still feared breaking if she let herself believe. But as she met his eyes, steady and patient, she realized something. She wasn't standing alone anymore, and maybe, just maybe, she was learning how to stand at all. Love had been an impossible word for her. To her, it had always meant pain, betrayal, or shame. Yet now, in the quiet moments by his side, she began to wonder if love could mean something else. Safety, belonging, even joy. It started with small gestures. When he worked late into the evening carving wood, she would place a bowl of food beside him, lingering just long enough for their fingers to brush. When he returned from hunting, she would meet him with water, her eyes shy but steady. Each act was a whisper she didn't yet have the courage to say aloud. I care. I need you. One morning she woke before him. The fire had burned low and he was sleeping on the ground, his arm folded beneath his head. For a long time, she simply watched him, her chest aching with something new and terrifying. The man who had given her dignity back, who had touched her like she was sacred, slept so peacefully at her side, trusting her presence as much as she trusted his. Her hand lifted without thought, trembling, and for the first time, she let herself touch him. Just lightly, her fingers brushing a strand of hair from his brow. He stirred but didn't wake. Her heart thundered, but instead of shame, warmth spread through her chest. She pulled her hand back, whispering to herself, maybe I can love. That day, she carried herself differently. The weight of her past was still there, but lighter, as though sharing it with him had lessened its hold. For the first time in years, she began to dream of a future. Later, when they were gathering water by the stream, she slipped on a wet rock and nearly fell. His arms caught her instantly, steadying her. Their eyes locked, his steady, hers wide and startled. She didn't pull away. Not this time. Her fingers clutched his arm, her lips parting as though words might tumble out. And then, in a voice as fragile as glass, she whispered, "Why do you stay? Why do you care for me when I'm—" Her breath broke. "When?" "I'm still broken." He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he lifted his hand slowly, giving her every chance to retreat. When she didn't, his palm cupped her cheek. "You are not broken," he said, his voice deep, certain. "You've been hurt, but hurt is not the same as broken. You are whole, even if you don't see it yet. And I stay because—" His eyes softened, the fire she had come to trust burning there. "Because my heart chose you." Her breath caught. She had dreamed of words like that once, long ago, before her world had been shattered. But hearing them now, from him, felt like a miracle. Tears welled in her eyes, and for the first time she didn't hide them. She let them fall, let them wash her face clean. And then, trembling but determined, she lifted her own hand and placed it over his. I don't know how," she whispered, "but I want to love you back." The silence between them deepened, filled not with fear but with something sacred. His smile was small but radiant, as though her words were the greatest gift he had ever received. From that day forward, she didn't just accept his love. She began to return it. In laughter, in touch, in the way her gaze lingered on him with something softer, freer. She was no longer only the woman who had cried, "I'm dirty." She was becoming the woman who dared to say, "I love." Love did not heal her overnight. Healing came like the sunrise, slow, gentle, impossible to rush. Yet each day she felt a little more alive, a little more herself. She no longer woke from nightmares drenched in sweat. When shadows crept into her mind, she spoke to him instead of retreating into silence. And he listened. Always. His presence, steady as the earth beneath her feet. One evening, as the fire painted the sky in gold and crimson, she sat beside him in the open air. Her heart beat with a strange calm. For weeks, she had carried a thought she wasn't brave enough to voice. Tonight, she decided to set it free. "I used to think my life was over," she whispered, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "That I would never be more than the names they gave me. That no one could look at me without disgust." He turned his head, but didn't interrupt. She smiled faintly, though her eyes glistened. But you looked at me like I was sacred, like I was, still human. And because of that, I started to believe I could be more than what was done to me. He reached for her hand. Their fingers laced together with ease now, without hesitation. You are more, he said softly. You always were. I only helped you see it. Her throat tightened. Tears slipped down, but this time they weren't born of shame. They were tears of release, of gratitude, of love too big to stay caged. Turning to him fully, she whispered the words she had feared for so long. I love you. The silence that followed was heavy, sacred. His eyes softened, warmth and reverence shining. In them, he cupped her face, the same way he had the first time when she had cried that she was dirty. But now she didn't flinch. She leaned into his touch, cherishing it. And I love you, he answered, his voice steady. Sure. It wasn't the grandness of the words that undid her. It was their truth. After everything, after the storms and scars, love had found her. That night, under the blanket of stars, she let herself rest fully in his arms for the first time. No fear, no trembling, just peace. His heartbeat against her cheek was steady, grounding, a rhythm she could finally trust. From then on, she lived not as a woman marked by shame, but as a woman reborn. She tended the fire with laughter instead of silence, met the world with eyes, unshadowed by fear. She even began to teach him small songs from her childhood, fragments of herself she had once believed lost forever. Her past had not disappeared, but it no longer defined her. It was part of her story, yes, but no longer the ending. With him, she had found a new chapter, one written not in pain, but in hope. And every time his hand touched her face, every time his eyes lingered on hers with reverence, she remembered the moment her life had changed. The moment she had cried, "Please, don't touch me. I'm dirty." And the moment he had answered not with words, but with a touch, gentle, sacred, unyielding, that told her she was not dirt, but light. For the rest of her life, she carried that truth. She was not broken, not unworthy. She was loved. She was whole. Trust is never born in a single moment. It grows, painfully and unevenly, like a plant fighting through hard soil. For her, trust was both a blessing and a threat. Each day spent with him made her stronger, yet each step forward carried the risk of heartbreak. And then came the moment that forced her to choose. It happened at dawn, when the air was sharp with morning chill. She was gathering her few things, a tattered shawl, a small pouch of dried herbs she carried for comfort, when she heard them. Voices again, not mocking this time, but familiar, sharp with authority. Her heart stopped. From the trees emerged men from her past. Not the ones who had hurt her, but men who knew. Men who had seen her fall, who carried the whispers of her shame like knives. One of them sneered as soon as he spotted her. "There you are. We've been looking. You don't belong here. Come back and face what you've done." The words were daggers. Her chest tightened, breath choking in her throat. Every instinct screamed at her to obey, to return to the life of scorn she knew too well. After all, wasn't that what she deserved? He appeared then, stepping beside her, his presence steady, his eyes hard on the men. "She doesn't belong to you," he said firmly. "She doesn't owe you anything." The men scoffed. "You don't know her past. You don't know what—" "She's done. She's filth. Nothing more." Her hands shook violently. She wanted to tell him to step back, to let them take her. It would be easier to run back into the cage she had always known, rather than risk being cherished and then abandoned. Her lips parted. "Maybe they're right," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Maybe I should go." His gaze turned, on her, sharp and unwavering. "Look at me," he said. She hesitated, but when her eyes finally lifted, she found no disgust there, no doubt, only fire. "They don't decide who you are," he told her. "Neither does your past. You choose. You can walk back into chains, or you can stay and fight for yourself." Her chest heaved. She felt torn in two, the part of her bound by years of shame, and the part that had begun, quietly, to believe in his touch, his words, his unwavering faith in her. The men waited impatiently, smirks twisting their faces. "She'll come," one of them sneered. "She always does. Broken things crawl back to the dirt." Something inside her snapped. She straightened, trembling but defiant, and stepped closer to him. The man who had seen her not as dirt, but as sacred. "No," she said, her voice unsteady, but stronger than before. "I'm not going back." The men faltered at her words. Anger flared in their eyes, but his hand reached out, steady on her shoulder, grounding her. He didn't need to say anything more. His presence was enough. At last the men muttered curses and retreated into the trees, their threats fading into the distance. Silence settled again. Her whole body shook, but this time not from fear, from release. She had chosen. For the first time in years, she had stood for herself. She turned to him, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I was so afraid," she whispered. He brushed the tears gently from her face, his touch as reverent as always. "Fear doesn't make you weak," he said softly. "Choosing in spite of it makes you strong." Her lips trembled, but for the first time, she didn't argue. She let herself believe him, and deep inside, something long buried began to bloom. The choice she made that morning stayed with her. For the first time, she hadn't let shame drag her back into the shadows. For the first time, she had stood her ground. And though her body still trembled with the memory, there was a strange warmth in her chest, the warmth of having chosen herself. He never praised her aloud for it, never showered her with words. But she saw the quiet pride in his eyes when they met hers, saw the softness in his smile when he handed her the water bucket that evening. His silence spoke louder than any declaration, and slowly, she found herself wanting to fill that silence. One night, they sat by the fire, the crackle of flames breaking the stillness. She glanced at him, her heart pounding. There were things she had carried inside her for too long. Words unspoken, memories locked away. Fear told her to stay quiet, but another voice whispered, "He won't leave. He won't hate you." Her hands twisted in her lap as she finally whispered, "Do you want to know what happened to me?" He looked at her, his expression unreadable, then nodded once. "Only if you want to tell me." Tears pricked her eyes at his answer. He wasn't demanding, wasn't prying. He was giving her the choice. And so, for the first time, she began to speak. The words came haltingly at first, fragments of pain, broken confessions. She told him of the night her dignity was stolen, of the names they branded her with, of how she had believed every lie. Her voice cracked, faltered, but he never interrupted. He simply listened, his eyes steady on hers, his silence a shelter. By the time she finished, her cheeks were wet, her throat raw. She lowered her gaze, bracing herself for disgust, for pity, for anything that would prove her worst fears true. But when his hand reached for hers, his touch was steady, warm. "None of that makes you less," he said softly. "It doesn't touch the worth I see in you." Her chest broke open with sobs, not from shame this time, but from relief. For years, she had carried her past like chains, believing no one could see her without recoiling. And here he was, touching her hand, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. That night, she slept closer to him than ever before. Not touching, not yet, but near enough to feel the steady rhythm of his breathing beside her. It was the first night in years she didn't wake screaming. In the days that followed, something shifted. She began to laugh more easily, the sound no longer brittle, but soft and real. She met his eyes without fear. And once, when he offered his hand to help her climb a steep path, she didn't hesitate before taking it. Each small step was terrifying, but also liberating. Love had always been a wound to her, a dangerous thing that only left scars. But now, with him, it felt different, like light seeping into cracks, like water reviving a barren field. And though fear still whispered that it could all be taken from her, she held on to the new truth growing inside her. She was worthy of being touched, being cherished, being loved. For the first time, she wasn't only surviving, she was learning how to live.